I never thought my Saturday morning would start with simultaneous calls from the fire department and police. But here we are. My phone exploded with notifications at 7:30 in the morning, pulling me from the first decent sleep I'd had all week. The security system app was lighting up like a Christmas tree, showing multiple breach alerts from my propane shed out back. Before I could even process what I was seeing, my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed the monitoring company. "Mr. Oliver, this is Secure Watch Monitoring. We've detected unauthorized entry into your propane storage unit along with temperature spikes and potential gas leak indicators. We've already dispatched fire and police to your location per protocol. Are you safe?" I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm in the house." "What the hell is happening?" "Sir, please evacuate immediately and wait for emergency services at a safe distance. Do not approach the structure." I grabbed my jeans and threw them on, shoving my feet into the nearest shoes. My hands were shaking as I pulled a shirt over my head and ran down the stairs. Through the kitchen window, I could see smoke or vapor. I couldn't tell which, billowing from the side yard where I'd built the propane shed 6 months ago. The shed was a proper structure, built to code and inspected, designed to safely house the large propane tanks I used for my metalworking hobby and backup generator. As I rushed out the front door, sirens were already wailing in the distance, getting closer. My neighbor across the street, Tom, was standing on his lawn in his bathrobe, phone pressed to his ear, staring toward my property. "Ethan, what's going on?" he called out. "I don't know. Someone broke into my propane shed." The fire truck rounded the corner first, followed immediately by 2 police cruisers. The whole cul-de-sac was waking up now, people emerging onto their porches and lawns. This was exactly the kind of attention I tried to avoid when I built the shed. I'd done everything by the book, gotten every permit, passed every inspection, specifically because I knew someone would have a problem with it. And that someone had been Patricia Morrison. The firefighters were already deploying, treating it like a hazmat situation. 2 of them approached me while the others began assessing the scene. "You're the homeowner?" the taller one asked, his face serious beneath his helmet. "Yes, Ethan Oliver. I didn't go in there. The monitoring company called me and told me to evacuate." "Good. That was smart. You store propane in there. 300-gallon tank for my generator and workshop equipment, all properly installed and inspected. Everything was secure when I checked it last night." A police officer joined us, notebook already out. "Mr. Oliver, I'm Officer Davis. Your monitoring company reported a break-in. Do you know who might have accessed the structure?" Before I could answer, one of the firefighters called out from near the shed. "We've got someone in here. Female, conscious, appears to be injured." My stomach dropped. Someone was actually in my propane shed. The next few minutes were chaos. The firefighters brought out a woman on a stretcher, and even from 50 feet away I recognized her immediately. Patricia Morrison, the HOA president, covered in some kind of white powder, coughing and sputtering. Her carefully maintained blonde hair was disheveled, and she was clutching her arm. An ambulance that had just arrived took over her care while the firefighters continued to assess the situation. The lead firefighter came back to me after conferring with his team. "Looks like she tried to tamper with your propane tank connections. The powder is fire extinguisher discharge. Your system detected the tampering and the gas leak she caused, and automatically deployed the extinguisher system. Probably saved her life and definitely saved your property." Officer Davis was now very interested. "You're saying she was deliberately tampering with the propane system?" "That's what it looks like. We've got photos and we'll include it in our report. This could have been catastrophic." If that gas had reached an ignition source, we'd be looking at a major explosion. I felt cold despite the warm Arizona morning. Phoenix in June was already heating up, even this early. She could have blown up my house, the whole neighborhood, possibly. Depends on how much gas escaped before your safety system's activated. You've got a good setup here, Mr. Oliver. Code compliant with extras. That monitoring system and automatic suppression probably prevented a disaster. Officer Davis's partner had been talking to Patricia where the paramedics were treating her. He came over with a grim expression. She's claiming she had a right to inspect the structure because of HOA regulations. Says it's been a safety concern, and she was doing her duty as HOA president. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. A safety concern. That's rich. The only thing she's been concerned about is trying to get me to tear it down because she thinks it's an eyesore. Officer Davis looked at me. Tell me about your history with Mrs. Morrison. Where did I even start? I'd moved into this neighborhood in Scottsdale 2 years ago, attracted by the reasonable HOA fees and seemingly straightforward covenants. The neighborhood was nice, quiet, established homes from the 90s with mature landscaping and enough space between properties. For the first year and a half, everything was fine. I kept my lawn maintained, my house painted in approved colors, and generally stayed out of neighborhood politics. Then I'd started my metalworking business. Nothing major, just custom fabrication work, artistic pieces mostly, working out of my garage. I'd invested in proper equipment, including a good ventilation system and safety gear. But I needed reliable power, and I wanted backup propane for both my forge and generators in case of outages. I'd done my research, hired contractors, pulled permits with the city, and built a proper propane storage shed in my side yard. It was tucked behind a decorative fence, landscaped to blend in, and met every fire code and safety regulation. The city inspector had actually complimented the installation. Patricia Morrison had shown up the day after the final inspection, clipboard in hand and fury in her eyes. This structure was never approved by the HOA Architectural Committee, she'd announced, standing in my driveway like she owned it. I checked the covenants. Storage structures under a certain size don't require approval as long as they meet setback requirements and match the house materials. This qualifies. This is a propane storage facility, not a garden shed. This is a safety hazard and an eyesore, and I will not have it in my neighborhood. That had been 4 months ago, and she'd been making my life hell ever since. Citations for my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. Complaints about my truck being parked in my driveway instead of the garage. Letters about the color of my garage door somehow being different from my front door, even though they were both the same shade of beige. She'd even tried to fine me for having my garbage cans visible from the street, even though trash day was the only time that was true. I'd pushed back on every frivolous citation, which only made her more determined. She'd called the city inspector 3 times trying to get him to red tag my shed. He'd gotten so annoyed that he'd sent me a letter confirming the installation was completely code compliant, just so I'd have documentation. I'd sent that letter to Patricia and the HOA board. That's when things had escalated. She'd started a petition among the neighbors to have my shed declared a nuisance. Most people ignored it or told me privately they thought she was being ridiculous. Tom across the street had actually laughed when she approached him, telling her he wished he'd thought of it first for his RV. But Patricia Morrison was nothing if not persistent. She'd amended the HOA covenants or tried to without proper voting procedures. I'd had to hire a lawyer to send a cease and desist. That had been 2 weeks ago. And now here she was, being loaded into an ambulance after apparently breaking into my propane shed and tampering with equipment that could have killed people. I explained all of this to Officer Davis while his partner took statements from other neighbors who'd gathered. The firefighters had ventilated my shed and declared it safe, though they recommended a full inspection before I used the system again. "Mr. Oliver, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. We'll also need access to your security footage." "I can pull it up right now on my phone. The whole system is cloud-based." I opened the app and found the relevant timestamps. The footage was crystal clear, high-definition cameras with night vision that I'd installed specifically because of Patricia's harassment. The timestamp showed she'd approached my side gate at 6:53 in the morning. The video showed her looking around nervously before pulling bolt cutters from a large bag she was carrying. She cut through the lock on my gate, which made my jaw clench. That gate had cost me $400. She then approached the propane shed and pulled out what looked like a crowbar. "She came prepared," Officer Davis muttered, watching over my shoulder. The shed door was secured with a commercial-grade padlock. Patricia struggled with it for almost 5 minutes before finally using the crowbar to pry at the door frame. The door itself held, but the frame splintered enough for her to reach in and unlatch it from the inside. The camera inside the shed, which she apparently hadn't anticipated, showed her entering with a flashlight. She looked around at the propane tank setup, the monitoring equipment, the automatic safety systems. Then she pulled out a wrench from her bag and approached the main tank connection. "This is premeditated," Officer Davis said. "She brought tools specifically to do this." On the video, Patricia began loosening the connection fitting. Immediately, the gas detector alarm started blaring. A red strobe light activated, and within seconds, the automatic shut-off valves triggered. But not before enough gas had escaped to reach dangerous levels. The fire suppression system deployed, filling the small shed with extinguisher powder. Patricia, caught in the discharge, stumbled backwards, slipped, and fell against a shelf. That's when she must have injured her arm. The video showed her struggling to get out, coughing and disoriented when the firefighters arrived and pulled her clear. "Can you send that footage to this email address?" Officer Davis handed me a card. "This is clear evidence of breaking and entering, vandalism, and reckless endangerment at minimum. Given the potential for explosion, there might be more serious charges." Another officer had been talking to Patricia against her protests as the paramedics prepared to transport her. He came over shaking his head. "She's still insisting she had every right to inspect the property for HOA violations. Says Mr. Oliver has been flagrantly disregarding HOA authority and she was documenting safety violations. With bolt cutters and a wrench at 7 in the morning. Officer Davis raised an eyebrow. "We'll be charging her. Mrs. Morrison, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, vandalism, and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." The recitation of Miranda rights carried across my lawn as Patricia's face went from indignant to pale. The paramedics looked uncomfortable, caught between medical treatment and law enforcement. They agreed to transport her to the hospital with a police escort, where she'd be treated and then taken into custody. As the ambulance pulled away, I stood in my front yard surrounded by neighbors, trying to process everything. Tom came over and clapped me on the shoulder. "That woman has lost her mind. I mean, we all knew she was intense, but this, she could have killed people. I know, I can't believe she actually did this. You need a good lawyer, man. Sue the hell out of her and the HOA. I hadn't even thought that far ahead yet, but he was right. This wasn't just going away. The fire department captain came over before leaving. "Mr. Oliver, I need to commend your safety setup. A lot of people would have cut corners, but your monitoring system and automatic suppression absolutely prevented a catastrophe. We're going to recommend you get a full inspection before using the system again, but your contractor did excellent work. Thank you. I'll call them today. You'll have our full report by Monday. The fire marshal will probably want to speak with you as well, given the circumstances. As the emergency vehicles cleared out, I finally went back inside, exhausted despite the adrenaline still pumping through my system. It wasn't even 9 in the morning yet. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the side yard where evidence markers still flagged various points of Patricia's break-in. My phone rang. Unknown number, but local area code. This is Ethan Oliver. Mr. Oliver, this is Richard Chen from the HOA board. I've just heard about what happened this morning. On behalf of the board, I want to apologize and assure you that Patricia Morrison was acting entirely on her own. Her actions do not represent the board or the community. Richard was one of the reasonable ones, a software engineer who'd been on the board for years. He'd voted against most of Patricia's proposals regarding my property. Richard, she broke into my shed and tried to cause a gas leak. She could have blown up half the block. I know. This is insane. The board is meeting in emergency session this afternoon. Patricia's being removed as president immediately, and we're consulting with our lawyer about the HOA's liability. I want you to know that we'll cooperate fully with any legal action you take. What she did was criminal, and it has nothing to do with legitimate HOA business. I appreciate that. I'll probably have my lawyer reach out next week. After Richard hung up, I pulled up my lawyer's contact. Jennifer Martinez had helped me with the earlier HOA disputes. I left her a message explaining what happened and asking her to call me back. The rest of Saturday was a blur. The police came back to do a more thorough evidence collection. My insurance company needed to be notified. The propane company sent an emergency technician to inspect the system. And while the automatic shut-offs had worked perfectly, I needed some replacement parts where Patricia had damaged the fittings. You're lucky, the technician said, a grizzled guy named Frank who'd been in the business for 30 years. Another couple turns on that wrench and she'd have had a catastrophic release. Your safety system is top-notch, but it can only do so much. If that gas had reached your hot water heater pilot light or any ignition source before the suppression kicked in, boom. That's what everyone keeps saying. Because it's true. I've seen propane accidents. They're not pretty. This lady, whatever her problem was, she was playing with something she didn't understand. Propane is safe when it's handled right, but it's still an explosive gas under pressure. The repairs would take a few days to complete. In the meantime, I had to shut down my workshop, which meant delays on 3 client projects. That was going to cost me money, added to the property damage, the emotional distress, and everything else. Jennifer Martinez called me back that evening. I'd worked with her before and trusted her judgment. She was a sharp attorney who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Ethan, I've been following up on what you told me. This is serious. Beyond your personal civil suit against Morrison, there's the question of HOA liability. Even though she was acting outside her authority, she did it in her capacity as HOA president. The current board wants to cooperate. Richard Chen called me. That's smart of them. Look, I'll be honest, you have a slam-dunk case here. Criminal charges are being filed. You have video evidence. You have documented harassment leading up to this incident, and you have actual damages. The question is how far you want to take this. I want to be compensated for my damages, and I want assurance this won't happen again. I don't want to bankrupt the HOA because that just hurts my neighbors. That's reasonable. Let me draft a demand letter. We'll ask for full compensation for damages, attorney fees, removal of all previous citations against you, and a restraining order against Morrison. We can also demand the HOA amend their procedures to prevent this kind of abuse of power in the future. Do it. Sunday was quieter. I stayed home, worked on designs at my computer since I couldn't use my forge, and tried to relax. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. Several neighbors stopped by to express support or just to get the story firsthand. Everyone had their own Patricia Morrison horror story, it turned out. Linda from 3 doors down had been fined for having the wrong mailbox color, even though it was the same one that had been there for 15 years. Greg around the corner got cited for parking his work van in his driveway, even though he owned a plumbing business and needed the van for service calls. Marie next door had been harassed about her vegetable garden being visible from the street. She's been on a power trip for 2 years, Marie told me, sitting on my front porch with a glass of iced tea. Ever since she became president. Before that, the HOA was pretty hands-off, but she turned it into her personal fiefdom. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her, even if it took her doing something criminal. I didn't plan on any of this. I just wanted to run my business and live my life. You did everything right. That's what made her so mad. She couldn't find legitimate violations, so she manufactured them. And when that didn't work, she snapped. Monday morning brought a call from Detective Sarah Walsh from the Scottsdale Police Department. She was assigned to Patricia's case and needed to take a formal statement. I drove to the station and spent 2 hours going through everything in detail. Detective Walsh was thorough, asking about every interaction with Patricia, every citation, every conflict. I'd brought copies of all the documents, the letters from Patricia, the responses from my lawyer, the city inspector's approval letters, everything. This paints a clear picture of escalating harassment, Detective Walsh said, reviewing the timeline I'd laid out. Morrison became fixated on your property and couldn't accept that you were within your rights. The break-in was the culmination of months of obsessive behavior. What kind of charges is she facing? Right now, breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, criminal damage, and reckless endangerment. The county attorney is reviewing whether to add charges related to attempted arson or endangerment with explosives. Given the potential for catastrophic damage, they're taking this very seriously. Is she out on bail? She was released Sunday afternoon. There's a court order that she's to have no contact with you and she's not to come within 500 feet of your property. If she violates that, call 911 immediately. I left the police station feeling drained. This whole situation was surreal. I'd moved to Scottsdale for a quiet place to live and work, and now I was in the middle of a criminal case because my HOA president had gone off the deep end. Jennifer called me Tuesday afternoon with an update. I sent the demand letter to the HOA's attorney and to Morrison's personal lawyer. The HOA attorney has already responded. They want to settle. They're offering full compensation for all damages, removal of all citations, and they're agreeing to policy changes. They're also offering to cover your attorney fees. What about Morrison personally? Her lawyer hasn't responded yet. But honestly, between the criminal charges and the civil suit, she's looking at serious consequences. I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to settle eventually, but right now she's probably focused on the criminal case. What do you think I should do about the HOA's offer? Take it. It's fair, it gets you compensated, and it preserves your relationship with your neighbors. We'll still pursue Morrison separately for additional damages and the restraining order. I agreed, and Jennifer handled the settlement negotiations. By the end of the week, I had a check from the HOA's insurance company covering the gate, the shed repairs, the propane system damage, my lost business income, and my attorney fees. The HOA board also sent a formal letter apologizing and confirming that all previous citations against my property were withdrawn. The propane system repairs were completed Friday. Frank did the final inspection and gave me the all-clear to resume operations. Good as new. Actually better, since we upgraded a few components. You won't have any problems. I was finally able to get back to work, finishing the custom railing project I'd been working on before all this started. The metalwork was soothing, the repetitive hammering and shaping helping to work out the stress and anger I'd been carrying. Patricia Morrison's preliminary hearing was scheduled for late July. Jennifer advised me that I'd probably have to testify about the history of harassment and conflicts. The detective called to let me know that the county attorney had decided to add charges of attempted arson, given that tampering with a propane system with the intent to cause damage met the legal definition. She's looking at potential felony charges now, Detective Walsh explained. Her lawyer has approached the prosecutor about a plea deal, but so far Morrison is insisting she was within her rights as HOA president. That's insane. Her lawyer knows it. I expect she'll eventually accept reality, but right now she's in denial. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new HOA president was a retired teacher named Margaret who ran meetings efficiently and without drama. At the first board meeting after Patricia's removal, they voted to amend the enforcement procedures to require board approval for any citation and to establish an appeals process for homeowners. We're going back to what the HOA should be, Margaret told me when I attended the meeting. Maintaining property values and common areas, not harassing homeowners over nonsense. I appreciated the changes, even though I was still wary. Once you've had someone break into your property and try to cause an explosion, it's hard to trust the organization they represented, even if that organization was making changes. My business was doing well. The incident had actually generated some publicity, with local news covering the story of the HOA president who broke into a resident's propane shed. Several people had reached out asking about my metalwork, impressed by the safety systems I'd installed. I got 3 new clients in July alone. Patricia's preliminary hearing came and went. Based on the video evidence and testimony, the judge found probable cause for all charges to proceed to trial. Patricia's lawyer negotiated a plea agreement with the prosecutor's office. In mid-August, I sat in the courtroom as Patricia Morrison pleaded guilty to breaking and entering, criminal damage, and reckless endangerment. The attempted arson charge was dropped as part of the plea. Her sentencing was scheduled for September. Jennifer and I also attended, since the criminal proceedings would impact our civil case. Patricia looked diminished, standing before the judge in a conservative dress, her lawyer beside her. The confident, aggressive HOA president was gone, replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated. The sentencing hearing in September was more involved. The prosecutor presented the facts of the case, emphasizing the potential for catastrophic damage and loss of life. Patricia's lawyer argued for leniency, presenting letters from her family and her therapist, claiming she'd been under extreme stress and had experienced a mental health crisis. Jennifer stood when given the opportunity to speak on behalf of victims. Your Honor, Mr. Oliver has prepared a victim impact statement. I approached the podium, my written statement in hand. I'd spent days working on it, trying to articulate the impact this had on my life. Your Honor, on June 14th of this year, I woke up to alerts that someone had broken into my propane storage facility and was tampering with equipment that could have caused an explosion. That someone was Patricia Morrison, who had spent months harassing me because I built a legal, code-compliant structure on my own property. I've included documentation of her harassment, showing a pattern of behavior that culminated in her breaking into my property with tools, with the apparent intent to damage or disable my propane system. The fire department, the propane technician, and multiple experts have confirmed that her actions could have caused a catastrophic explosion that would have destroyed my home and potentially several neighboring homes. People could have died, including Mrs. Morrison herself. The only reason that didn't happen was because I invested in extensive safety systems that detected the tampering and automatically shut down the gas flow. I did that specifically because I understood the potential dangers of propane storage. Mrs. Morrison, with no knowledge or training, decided she knew better and took it upon herself to tamper with equipment she didn't understand. Beyond the immediate danger, this incident has affected my sense of security in my own home. I've had to install additional security measures. I've lost income from my business due to the repairs, and I've lost trust in the community organization that's supposed to serve homeowners, not terrorize them. While the HOA has made changes and settled with me, the damage to that relationship remains. I ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects the serious nature of these crimes and ensures that Mrs. Morrison cannot pose a threat to me or anyone else in the future. The judge listened carefully, reviewing the documents before him. He asked Patricia if she wanted to make a statement. She stood, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'd convinced myself that Mr. Oliver's shed was dangerous and that I needed to document it. I never intended to hurt anyone. I'm deeply sorry for my actions and the fear I caused." It was the first time I'd heard her sound anything other than self-righteous. The judge considered for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Morrison, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that position to harass a homeowner who was fully within his rights. When your harassment didn't achieve your goals, you escalated to criminal behavior that could have resulted in multiple deaths. The only reason we're not discussing manslaughter charges is because Mr. Oliver had the foresight to install safety systems that prevented the disaster you nearly caused. I've reviewed the psychological evaluation, and while I accept that you were under stress, that does not excuse breaking into someone's property with tools and tampering with explosive gas systems. For the crime of breaking and entering, I sentence you to 2 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. For criminal damage and reckless endangerment, I sentence you to concurrent terms of 18 months each. I'm suspending all but 6 months of the sentence, which you will serve in county jail. Upon release, you will be on probation for 3 years, during which you will complete 200 hours of community service, continue mental health treatment, and have no contact with Mr. Oliver or his property. You are also prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position during your probationary period. Additionally, you will pay restitution in the amount of $8,300 to cover Mr. Oliver's uninsured losses. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her lawyer whispered something to her, and she was led away by the bailiff. Jennifer and I left the courthouse together. "That's a fair sentence," she said. 6 months in jail will give her time to reflect, and the probation terms protect you going forward. What about the civil suit? Her lawyer has already reached out about settling. With the criminal conviction, she knows she'll lose if we go to trial. I expect we'll have a settlement offer within a week. She was right. Patricia's lawyer offered $50,000 to settle all civil claims. including a formal restraining order. Jennifer negotiated it up to $75,000, covering my attorney fees, the deductible I'd paid on my insurance, compensation for the harassment and emotional distress, and punitive damages. I accepted. The money wasn't the point, but it did help cover the security upgrades I'd made and provided some compensation for the months of stress Patricia had put me through. Patricia reported to county jail in October. The neighborhood was quiet without her presence. The new HOA board was functioning smoothly, handling actual community issues like street repairs and landscaping maintenance without the drama and harassment that had defined Patricia's tenure. Tom and I were having a beer on his patio one evening in November when he brought it up. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't installed all those safety systems? All the time. Frank, the propane tech, showed me the calculations. If that gas had reached my hot water heater, or the garage where I sometimes have sparks from welding, the explosion would have taken out my house for sure, probably yours too, and at least 2 others. Could have killed a dozen people. And Patricia was so convinced she was right that she was willing to risk all that. That's what scares me. She genuinely believed she was in the right, that my shed was the danger, not her actions. That level of delusion is terrifying. At least she's paying for it now. Literally and figuratively. The holidays came and went. My business continued to grow. I completed several major projects and was booked out for months. The neighborhood remained peaceful. I attended HOA meetings occasionally, mostly to stay informed, but the organization had returned to being what it should be, a boring administrative body handling maintenance and basic rules. Patricia was released from jail in March after serving her full 6 months. I only knew because Detective Walsh called to inform me, as required by victim notification laws. She's been released on probation, Mr. Oliver. The restraining order is still in effect. If she contacts you or comes near your property, call 911 immediately. Understood. Thank you. I never saw her again. According to neighborhood gossip, she moved away, unable to face the community after everything that happened. Her house sold in April to a nice young family with 2 kids who had no idea about the drama that had unfolded before they arrived. Life settled into a new normal. My metalworking business continued to thrive. I even hired an assistant in June, a recent graduate from the Art Institute who was eager to learn fabrication techniques. The propane shed that had caused so much conflict now stood quietly behind its decorative fence, its safety systems monitoring and protecting, doing their job without incident. I'd learned a lot from the whole experience, about standing up for yourself when you're in the right, about the importance of documentation when dealing with difficult people, about investing in proper safety systems, not just because they're required, but because they can prevent disasters, and about how positions of minor authority can corrupt people who aren't equipped to handle them responsibly. The neighborhood had learned too. The revised HOA procedures included term limits for board members, transparency requirements, and that appeals process. Margaret proved to be an excellent president, and when her term ended, she was replaced by another reasonable person who continued the sane approach to community management. I was out in my workshop one evening in July, a year after the incident, working on a custom gate for a client. The forge was hot, the metal was glowing, and I was in that meditative state that comes from focused physical work. My phone buzzed with a notification. The security system, still monitoring, still protecting, reporting that all was well. I smiled and returned to my work. The gate I was making was for a private residence, intricate scroll work that would be both beautiful and functional. The client had found me through word of mouth. impressed by my attention to detail. And, yes, by the story of the HOA president who'd broken into my propane shed only to be thwarted by proper safety systems. "That's the kind of thoroughness I want in someone working on my property," he'd said when he hired me. Tom came around the side of the house, 2 beers in hand. He'd gotten into the habit of stopping by when he saw me working, enjoying the casual friendship that had deepened through everything that had happened. Making progress on that gate. "Yeah, should have it done by the weekend. Want to give me a hand with the final assembly?" "Sure thing." "Hey, did you hear the HOA is planning a neighborhood block party for Labor Day?" I saw the email. "Are you going?" "Thinking about it. Margaret's been pushing for more community events, trying to get people actually talking to each other instead of just filing complaints." "That's not a bad idea." Maybe if Patricia had known her neighbors as people instead of just properties to police, things would have been different. Maybe. Or maybe she was just a control freak who shouldn't have had any authority over anyone. We both laughed at that. Tom handed me a beer and we stood there for a moment, comfortable in the silence, watching the sun set behind the houses. "You ever regret moving here?" Tom asked. I considered the question. Despite everything that had happened, the answer was simple. No, this is my home. I've built a business here, made friends, become part of the community. What happened with Patricia was insane, but it was one person having a mental breakdown, not a reflection of the neighborhood itself. That's a healthy way to look at it. The alternative is to let her win by driving me out, and I'm not giving her that satisfaction. We finished our beers, and Tom headed home to his family. I worked for another hour, the rhythmic hammering of metal a satisfying end to the day. As I locked up the workshop and checked the propane shed one last time, I felt grateful. Grateful for the safety systems that had prevented tragedy. Grateful for the neighbors who'd supported me. Grateful for a justice system that, despite its flaws, had held Patricia accountable for her actions. And grateful that I'd stood my ground when it mattered. The propane shed stood silent in the darkness, its monitoring systems active, its safety protocols ready. It was just a building, really, a functional structure for storing fuel. But it had become something more through the crucible of conflict. A symbol of doing things right, of not backing down when you're in the right, of the importance of preparation and safety. I went inside, set the security system, and poured myself a bourbon. The house was quiet, peaceful. Through the window, I could see the lights of my neighbors' homes, each one containing people living their lives, mostly oblivious to how close they'd come to disaster a year ago. My phone buzzed again. A text from a potential client asking about commissioning a custom fire pit. I sent a quick reply confirming I'd call her tomorrow to discuss the project, then set the phone down. Tomorrow would bring new work, new projects, the ongoing routine of running a business and living life. But tonight, I just sat in my comfortable chair, sipping bourbon, reflecting on how a simple decision to build a code-compliant propane shed had set off a chain of events that ended with a HOA president in jail and me sitting here, victorious but wary, having learned lessons I'd never expected to need. The ice in my glass clinked as I raised it in a solitary toast to the security cameras, the monitoring system, the automatic shutoffs, and every safety feature that had turned Patricia Morrison's breaking and entering into nothing more than a failed attempt at destruction. Technology and proper planning had saved the day, along with a legal system that recognized criminal behavior regardless of the excuse. As I headed to bed, I took one last look at the security app on my phone. All systems green. All zones secure. The propane shed, the focal point of so much conflict, was just another building again, serving its purpose without drama. And that's exactly how I wanted it to stay. The next morning brought sunshine and the promise of a productive day. I had breakfast on the patio, reviewing project notes for the custom gate. The metalwork was intricate, challenging in the best way. These were the projects I loved, the ones that pushed my skills and resulted in something beautiful and functional. Around 9, Jennifer called with final paperwork on the settlement. The last check cleared, and I've filed all the closing documents. Your case against Patricia Morrison and your dispute with the HOA are officially resolved. How are you feeling? Relieved. Ready to put it all behind me and just focus on work. That's good. And Ethan, you handled this whole situation with a lot of class. A lot of people would have gone scorched earth, but you were reasonable even when you had every right to be angry. I was angry. I'm still angry when I think about it too hard, but destroying her life beyond the natural consequences of her actions wouldn't have made me feel better, and it would have hurt the HOA and my neighbors who had nothing to do with it. Well, it worked out. You're fully compensated, she's faced serious consequences, and the community is better off. That's about as good an outcome as you could hope for. After hanging up, I headed out to the workshop. My assistant, Danny, arrived at 10, ready to help with the gate project. He was a good kid, talented and eager to learn. Working with him reminded me why I'd started this business in the first place, the satisfaction of creating something with your hands and passing on skills to the next generation. We worked through the morning, the gate taking shape piece by piece. Danny had a good eye for detail, catching a misalignment that I'd missed, and suggesting a modification to the scrollwork that actually improved the design. You've got real talent, I told him during our lunch break. Have you thought about what you want to specialize in? Honestly, I love all of it, but architectural metalwork like this, functional art, that's really satisfying. Making something that people will use and see every day. That's the best part of this work. 50 years from now, people will still be opening this gate, and if we do it right, it'll still be beautiful and functional. We finished the gate by Friday, loaded it carefully into my truck, and delivered it to the client on Saturday morning. The installation went smoothly, and the client was thrilled with the result. As we packed up our tools, she handed me a check and a business card. My sister is renovating her house and needs custom railings for the staircase. I told her she has to hire you. That's her contact information. Word of mouth was the best advertising. Every satisfied client led to more work, building a reputation that no marketing budget could buy. The summer passed in a blur of projects and long workshop days. The neighborhood block party in September was actually fun. A chance to connect with neighbors as people rather than just faces I waved to while getting the mail. Margaret had done a good job organizing it, keeping it simple with a potluck and some yard games for the kids. I brought brisket that I'd smoked overnight, and it was a hit. People asked about my business, genuinely interested rather than complaining about noise or fumes. Several neighbors mentioned they were glad the drama with Patricia was over and that things had returned to normal. Normal is underrated, Linda said, loading her plate with potato salad. I'll take boring HOA meetings and quiet streets over whatever that was. As fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures that made workshop time more comfortable, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in a year and how much had stayed the same. The propane shed stood in the same spot, still properly maintained and monitored. The HOA still sent occasional emails about community issues, but they were reasonable and relevant. My business continued to grow, with projects booked months in advance. The main difference was internal. I'd learned to trust my instincts and stand my ground. I'd learned that doing things right, even when it cost more time and money, paid off in the end. I'd learned that documentation and proper systems weren't paranoia but practical protection. And I'd learned that most people were reasonable, but the unreasonable ones required firm boundaries and, when necessary, legal action. One evening in October, I was closing up the workshop when I noticed a car slow down in front of my house. My hand instinctively went to my phone, ready to check the security cameras. But it was just someone looking at house numbers, trying to find an address. They drove on and I relaxed. The hypervigilance had faded over the months, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. I wondered if it ever would completely. Having someone break into your property and try to cause an explosion changes you in subtle ways, but I was okay with that. Being aware, being prepared, those weren't bad things. Inside, I poured a glass of wine and settled into my evening routine. Emails, project planning, sketches for upcoming work. The familiar rhythm of running a small business. It was satisfying work, building something tangible with my own hands and growing a company that reflected my values. My phone rang. Unknown number again, but this time it was a reporter from a trade magazine for metalworkers. Mr. Oliver, I'm writing an article about integrating safety systems in metal shops, especially for those working with propane and other fuel sources. Your case came up in my research, and I'd love to interview you about your safety setup and what happened. We talked for 30 minutes. I explained my system, the monitoring, the automatic shutoffs, the fire suppression. I talked about the importance of treating propane with respect and investing in proper safety equipment. A lot of people would have cut corners, especially for a hobby-turned-business, the reporter said. What made you invest so heavily in safety? Honestly, I understood the risks. Propane is great. It's efficient and reliable, but it's also dangerous if mishandled. I didn't want to be the guy whose shop exploded because I was too cheap to do it right. The fact that those systems prevented a disaster when someone else tried to cause one was just validation that I'd made the right choice. The article came out in December, featuring photos of my workshop and propane setup. It generated some interest, with a few other metalworkers reaching out to ask about my monitoring system. I was happy to share information. The more people who took safety seriously, the better for everyone in the trade. The holidays came around again, the second since the incident. This time there was no tension, no wondering what Patricia might do next. She was gone, moved away according to the neighborhood grapevine, trying to rebuild her life elsewhere. I wished her well in an abstract way. I hoped she'd gotten the mental health treatment she needed and learned from the experience. But I also hoped I'd never have to deal with her again. New Year's Eve found me at Tom's house with several other neighbors, a casual gathering to ring in the new year. At midnight, we toasted to the year ahead, to continued peace and prosperity, to boring HOA meetings and quiet streets. To normal, Tom raised his glass. To normal, we all echoed. And it was. The next year brought more work, more growth, more integration into the community. Danny grew as a craftsman, taking on more responsibility. I hired a second assistant, a woman named Jennifer who'd worked in automotive fabrication and wanted to transition to architectural metalwork. The propane shed required routine maintenance, which I performed diligently. The monitoring system got a software update. Everything functioned as designed, protecting my investment and my safety without drama or incident. That's how it should have been all along. Sometimes I'd see new residents at HOA meetings, people who'd moved in after Patricia's tenure and had no idea about the history. They'd mention seeing my workshop or ask about custom metalwork, and I'd give them my card. The shed that had caused so much conflict was just a building to them. Notable only because it looked professionally done and well maintained, which is all I'd ever wanted it to be. As I write this, sitting in my workshop on a quiet evening with the forge cooling after a productive day, I realize that the whole experience, as traumatic as it was at the time, taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of doing things right, about how minor authority can corrupt, about community and neighbors and the difference between rules and harassment. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I also wouldn't trade the lessons learned or the outcome. My business thrived. My reputation grew. The HOA became a better organization. And I became more confident in my ability to handle conflicts and challenges. The security system chimed softly, running its evening diagnostic. All systems normal. All zones secure. The propane shed, the source of so much drama, sat quietly in the darkness. Just another building serving its purpose. And that's exactly how I wanted it to stay.